This report begins with a large fire on the outskirts of White Rocks, Utah in 1964 during a particularly cold February. The Tungstow House, an old pre-industrial home sitting on a large plot of land, was the central point of the blaze. White Rocks firefighters responded as quickly as possible given the remote location of the home, but were unable to save the historical building. The entire building was destroyed in the fire, which also claimed the lives of 65-year-old Vernon Tungstow, 63-year-old Lillian Tungstow, 41-year-old John Tungstow, 35-year-old Marianne Tungstow, and 58-year-old Josiah Wheeler. White Rocks firefighters arrived on the scene at approximately 2:15 a.m. on February 21st, 17 minutes after the calls first came into the department. By the time they had arrived, the fire had already spread throughout the entirety of the household and was beginning to threaten the nearby tree line. The White Rocks Fire Department worked diligently to get the fire under control, and finally, after almost 2 hours, they managed to extinguish most of the flames. By 5 a.m., the fire had been entirely contained, and the bodies of Josiah Wheeler and the Tungstows had been recovered. Recounts from that night highlighted some anomalies in the situation, the most prevalent being the feeling of pressure behind the eyes, which all present at the scene reported feeling that night. Some of the other first responders also complained of bloody noses and bloody ears, and a few reported having heard a high-pitched ringing in their ears during the encounter with the blaze. During the preliminary investigation, rookie firefighter John Terrillo discovered a stairway leading underground in the back of the property, which was disguised as an old cellar. Terrillo followed the stairway, discovering a massive underground tunnel that ran under the entire property, as well as a large entranceway to some sort of complex. He quickly made his way back above grounds to his commanding officer, Lieutenant Raymond Leibowitz, to inform him of the discovery. After being informed, Leibowitz, Terrillo, and another rookie firefighter named Paul Reed all readied their equipment and made their way down into the tunnel. After entering the tunnel, the three men traced the entire length, finding that it did roughly run along the perimeter of the property. No vehicles or equipment of any kind were located, save for the light fixtures and the wiring running along the walls and ceiling. After the trio secured the surrounding area, the decision was weighed as to whether or not they should proceed further into the complex or return to the surface and report their findings. Ultimately, the trio decided to sate their rapidly growing curiosity and investigate further. The entranceway led to a large, open area that was lined with numerous steel bay doors labeled A through P. The area was illuminated by a scattering of fluorescent lights, and the ceiling was covered in a tangled meshing of pipes and tubing that ran along the surface. Of the 16 bay doors in the central area, only 4 were unlocked and accessible at the time. Facilities E, F, H, and P. Making their way through the nearest bay door, the one labeled E, they followed a long concrete and metal hallway that connected to a well-lit laboratory. The room was unlike anything the firefighters had ever seen before. A pathway through the middle of the room led past 2 rows of large metal pressurized tanks. The tanks were hooked up with a mess of different wires and hoses that all fed into an apparatus connected to the ceiling. The 3 men did not stay long in the room and quickly moved back into the central area. The men decided then to move forward to the next bay door, the one labeled F. The inside of Facility F was very different from the other facility. The walls of the room were covered in large sheets of metal that encircled the entire area, with a chaotic assortment of wiring running across the surface. Many different tools of unknown purposes sat around the room on various tables and benches. In the center of the room sat a sizable cylindrical machine, roughly 6.5 feet tall by 4.5 feet in diameter. Many wires and cords ran along the floor from various monitors that were attached around the base of the machine. A large metal pipe stuck out from the top, surrounded by gauges and valves of various sizes. The entire machine gave off a fair bit of heat and was emitting a faint humming sound. Noting the potential fire hazard from the machines in the laboratory, the men made their way back into the central area and over to the bay door labeled H. After making their way through the hallway, the men noticed that each of them had blood coming from their noses. Further inspection showed that each of the men also had a thin line of blood stemming from their left ear. They all felt fine, other than the steadily increasing ringing in their ears, and weighed the decision as to whether or not they should turn back. Ultimately, they decided to continue forward. Facility H was much smaller in size than the other two, with the area to move about being exceptionally more compact. The facility was sectioned off into two areas, a clear workspace for whoever was working there, and beyond a short barricade, a large collection of chambers that looked similar to industrial dryers that connected from the floor and ceiling. There was little to see in Facility H, although, like the other facilities, there was no sign of life despite many of the machines appearing to be active. At the time, the men paid this little mind, and quickly made their way back into the central area over to the bay doors labeled Facility P. They did not make it far. After passing through the bay doors, all three men reported seeing a blinding white light coming from the far end of the hall. The constant ringing that had been steadily increasing was now overwhelming. In their initial report, Torillo and Leadwitz both said they had no idea what this was, but both noted an extreme pressure behind the eyes on top of the intense ringing. Suddenly, Reed collapsed on the floor, screaming in agony, clutching both of his ears. The other two men wasted no time collecting him and bringing him above ground, with Torillo staying behind to close the bay door as they left. Sources close to Reed reported that he never spoke of the incident after being released from the hospital, but he was never the same again. Leadwitz recalled during a psychiatric evaluation in 1965. "I thought he was going to die for sure. I served in Korea. I've seen my fair share of things I'd rather forget." The look in Reed's eyes. "I've never seen anyone look so afraid before." After seeing Reed off to the hospital and reporting their findings, Torillo and Leadwitz finished the remainder of their shift without incident and returned home like normal. It wasn't until later that night that either man realized anything was wrong. Around 6 p.m., Leadwitz collapsed in his food while eating dinner. When his wife went to check on him, she noticed thick streams of blood coming from his ears and eyes. Around the same time, Torillo was found unresponsive in a bathroom stall at a local tavern. He was also found with blood coming from his ears and eyes, and had also been vomiting up large amounts of a clear, yellowish liquid. Both men were rushed to St. Gabriel's Hospital, where Reed had already been admitted, but unfortunately, Torillo was pronounced dead upon arrival. His cause of death was officially recorded as a severe hemorrhagic stroke. He was 22 years old. Leadwitz and Reed were both admitted with severe hemorrhagic tremoring and remained hospitalized until early March. A cause for this condition was never officially discovered. After the firefighters were hospitalized, the decision was made for no one else to go down into the complex, although this would not be the case. Over the course of the next 2 days, follow-up investigations were conducted by the White Rocks Police Department, and the area was soon quarantined off from the public. This did not stop curious locals, however, with multiple separate instances of children being caught playing inside or around the abandoned facility, and one instance of a journalist taking photographs. More on that later. Approximately 72 hours after the fire department was first alerted, the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in and supposedly claimed jurisdiction over the investigation. Shortly after, The agency contracted out the disposal of the underground facility to an organization only identified as WIM, and over the course of the next month, they erased the facility from existence. In the weeks following the fire, many rumors regarding the incident had begun to spread throughout the local population. According to the locals familiar with the area at the time, the Tungstau house was mostly quiet all year round. It seemed, based on the recollections of the townsfolk, that the only member of the family that lived there full-time was Mary Ann, who was known to be a bit of an eccentric and a recluse. Vernon Tungstau and his son John had actually built a decent reputation working in applied physics at UC Berkeley, where it also seems they spent most of their time. The fifth man, Josiah Wheeler, was a successful entrepreneur, amassing a large fortune from the production and wholesale of industrial equipment. Mr. Wheeler also served as the chairman and CEO of Wheeler Industrial. Interestingly enough, Josiah Wheeler had managed to stay far away from the public eye despite his numerous accomplishments and successful endeavors. In research for this report, almost no public mentions of Josiah Wheeler or Wheeler Industrial could be located, but more on Mr. Wheeler another time. A reporter from California named Stanton Sherp was staying in town when the incident occurred, and must have felt a call to action of some kind when reading about it in the local paper. Stanton is a relatively unknown figure in this story. He was not local, and therefore had no friends in town, or anyone who knew him longer than a week. He was a standoffish man who kept to himself, choosing to keep the company of books in his free time. It is unknown why he was in town to begin with. However, his contribution to this story does not go unappreciated. On February 23rd, in the middle of a snowstorm at approximately 3:30 a.m., Stanton left his motel and made his way to the ruins of the Tungstau estate. As was standard, a single unit of 2 officers was dispatched to guard the property, both of whom reported not seeing anyone, but with the storm, it was hard to tell. Stanton spent an estimated total of 2 to 3 hours in the facility below, longer than any individual known to this investigation. We do not know what he saw, but if the state he was found in is any indication, it's a mystery better left alone. At 6:35 a.m., while on a routine patrol around the property, Officer Wes Coffer heard screaming coming from an unknown location that sounded far away. After searching for approximately 15 minutes, he surmised someone must have been in the tunnel. Officer Wes Coffer recounted the following from the scene. When I found him, I had to choke back vomit. He was naked, curled on the floor by the stairs. His body was covered in lacerations, some so deep the muscle beneath was visible. His face was covered in blood, stemming from his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. He continued to writhe on the floor in agony, screaming although his cries had been reduced to a hoarse wheeze. His hands were covered in blood, and almost all of his fingers had been broken at the tips. The scraps of his clothing were discovered alongside a small camera a few dozen feet away from the body. Stanton was transferred to St. Gabriel's Hospital as soon as possible. During the transportation, he erupted into a frenzy and had to be restrained for the remainder of his time with medical professionals. Doctors on staff at the time report it took a record 100 milligrams of morphine to sedate him. Unsurprisingly, later that night, his heart stopped. The official cause of death was labeled rabies, although the rapid deterioration of his condition and seeming lack of prior symptoms leaves much room for doubt. He was 55 years old. Corresponding reports from medical staff present during his autopsy reveal some very startling discoveries that still defy scientific explanation. Doctors discovered that many of his internal organs had decayed to the point of failure, with some more resembling a pulpy mass than organs at all. A thick, clear yellow liquid had replaced all of the blood in his veins, which when drained, smelled strongly of rotten fruit. Horrifyingly, it was also revealed that the lacerations covering his body had been self-inflicted. It is reported that when the FBI arrived, they confiscated Stanton's body, as well as the official coroner's report. The camera, however, was reportedly collected by his wife, who had arrived sometime before the FBI. Whether or not she saw any of the contents is unknown. From the film, only a single image has ever been recovered. Although it's hard to make out, this photo is believed to be the last thing Stanton saw before his mental break. This is a photo of Facility P, just on the other side of the bay door. Besides Stanton, Leidwitz, Terrillo, and Reed, no other person known to this investigation has gone beyond the doors of Facility P, and the prevailing theory is whatever this truly is the root cause of the aforementioned issues. In the photograph, a distorted white light can clearly be seen at the end of the hallway, surrounded by a large frame of some kind. The hallway leading up to the light is extremely degraded, unlike the rest of the complex, which showed some signs of being used recently. Some of the cabinets in the hallway also appear to be bending inwards, almost as if something were pulling on them. The mystery is far from solved. Many questions remain unanswered. Many innocent lives found themselves entangled in events far beyond their understanding, and for many of them, it cost everything. After numerous psychiatric evaluations, both Raymond Leidwitz and Paul Reed were deemed unfit for duty. Both men's lives had been in a downward spiral since the events of 1964, leading Leidwitz to take his own life in June of 1965, and Reed following suit just 1 month later. They were 37 and 29 respectively. Leidwitz left no motive, however, Reed left a note that was found next to his body which read, "I am haunted and broken, a shell of what I used to be. Everything is so blurred and nothing makes any sense." Leidwitz made it out. Terrillo made it out. Can I make it out? Mom and Dad, I'm so sorry. I truly am. But I won't let it take me. I love you. Goodbye. Officer Wes Coffer tragically lost his life when he lost control of his vehicle in September of 1965. The official report was that he was intoxicated. It should be known, as of 1964, Officer Coffer was a recovering alcoholic who had been sober for almost 10 years. He was 41 years old. Finally, and possibly the most tragic, none of the children that had been playing in the tunnel during that year are reported to have lived beyond 15 years of age. FBI agents were seen sporadically around the area of the Tungstow estate for the rest of the year, performing all manner of unknown tests at the site. Whatever work they contracted out was completed before the end of March 1964, with the results being that you would never be able to tell anything had ever been there at all. Over the years, the effort to cover up this event had been coordinated and tireless, with even the historical reference to the Tungstow estate being erased. Very little official evidence survives to this day regarding this terrible event, but the story does not end here.